Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world you probably didn't know existed, where bedtime wasn't just for rest, but for warfare. Well, soft warfare. Picture this: silk cushions stacked like artillery, embroidered sleepwear swishing in the candlelight, and noble Persians trading glancing blows with padded pillows under the same stars that watched over empires. Welcome to the lost, softly swinging art of pillow fighting in ancient Persia. You might laugh now, but you probably won't survive this, because yes, you'll be asleep long before we even get to the really plush scandals. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always love seeing who's drifting off with me around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across cold stone floors and soft slippers, brushing past quiet courtyards, into the perfumed hush of a Persian palace after dusk. Somewhere, a reed flute plays low and slow. Light flickers behind colored glass windows. There's food being cleared: dates, pomegranate seeds, little slivers of saffron bread, and already the chambers are filling with the thick, dreamy hush of a kingdom winding down. And yet, behind some of those embroidered curtains, something slightly more active is brewing. The Persians, especially the elites in places like Susa or Persepolis, didn't just go to bed. They transitioned, they indulged. They treated sleep like a sacred rite, complete with preparations, rituals, and, yes, occasionally, a full-blown pillow skirmish. Let's be clear, we're not talking about frat party chaos. These were genteel affairs, most of the time, carried out with cushions that were hand-dyed, hand-stitched, and sometimes even infused with crushed rose petals or dried mint leaves for extra dreamy impact. And if you think that sounds too luxurious to toss at someone's head, well, you haven't met a bored royal concubine. In wealthier households, bedtime was not unlike theater. There were attendants whose whole job was to fluff pillows, lay linens, adjust oil lamps. Imagine working 12 years in royal service, only to be knocked in the back of the head with a silk cushion by a giggling prince because you turned your back too soon. Now, historians still argue whether these pillow scuffles were common practice or exaggerated in later texts. Some believe they were metaphorical, a stand-in for more subtle forms of resistance or flirtation. Others argue there's too much anecdotal overlap for them not to have occurred. Either way, the feathered duels pop up in more than a few offhand scrolls. You slide into a chamber where the air is heavy with frankincense. The walls are tiled in deep lapis blue. Against a raised platform bed, stacked 6 pillows high, rests a delicate leather satchel filled with loose goose-down cushions, more than one slightly dented at the edge. A journal lies nearby, its last entry possibly interrupted by a well-aimed fluff to the forehead. And here's the thing: Persians believed in dreams, deeply. Some thought the veil between worlds thinned as one slept. So to cross that boundary well, your mind had to be clear, your heart soft, your body soothed. In some interpretations, a spontaneous pillow fight wasn't just frivolity. It was purgative, a last, sleepy expression of vitality before surrendering to the unknown. Also, let's be honest, they were probably just fun. You can't discount joy, even in historical contexts. There's one tale, definitely apocryphal, but too delightful to ignore, of a courtier named Ardashir who offended the satrap of Ecbatana by dozing during a poetry recital. The satrap allegedly hurled a tasseled pillow with such force that it knocked Ardashir off his cushion entirely. The punishment? The court applauded, and Ardashir was made pillow master for the week. In homes with less status, the spirit of play remained, even if the cushions weren't quite so luxurious. Children played sleep wars, where the last child lying still with a pillow over their head was declared the Dream Sultan. If that doesn't sound like every adult's secret fantasy, you may need to check your stress levels. By the way, don't confuse these with Roman feather flick duels or the slightly more aggressive pillow stick tournaments found centuries later in parts of Europe. The Persian tradition was less about victory and more about closeness, a shared softness, that strange intimacy of laughter before dreams. And while we can't be certain how widespread the practice was, one thing's clear. Persians had a deep and tactile relationship with their bedding. From camel hair bolsters in the Zagros Mountains to linen-wrapped cotton in the southern deserts, the care given to pillows rivaled that of rugs. Even in ancient inventories, you'll find entries for guest cushions and prayer nap bolsters, which means, yes, they probably had throw pillows too. That hasn't changed in 2,500 years. As you curl under your own quilt tonight, imagine the world of color and scent their bedrooms must have held. Lavender pressed into seams, stripes of ochre and plum, wooden headrests carved with birds. Not the kind of place you expect giggling or sneak attacks. But then again, history's full of surprises. So, next time someone tells you pillow fights are juvenile, you can gently remind them they were once, quite literally, fit for a king. You're still in that shadow-draped chamber, though now the lamps have burned a bit lower, and the hush has deepened. The air tastes faintly of jasmine and old cedar wood. Your breath moves softly in time with a breeze that flutters a silk curtain like a ghost looking for a place to rest. This is when the real winding down began, the part when rituals took over from ruckus and everything softened, slowed. Because for Persians, preparing for sleep wasn't just personal hygiene or nightly habit, it was ceremony. And in some noble households, that ceremony began with the great folding of the pillows. Not a military maneuver, though it sounds like one. No, this was a genuinely elaborate tradition in which cushions were arranged, aligned, sometimes even bowed over with weighted corners to form pleasing hills of fabric. Some speculate the folds represented waves. Others say they were meant to mimic the Zoroastrian flame motif. Historians still argue whether this folding practice carried symbolic meaning or was simply a stylized form of fluffing. But scrolls from the Sasanian period mention bed attendants being trained to fold the piece at sundown. And that's not just a poetic turn of phrase. Folding the piece meant shaping the bed so that it embraced the sleeper rather than challenged them. Blankets were tucked into a V, with the pillow arranged not behind your head but under your shoulder blades. Why? Supposedly to elevate dreams, or maybe just to confuse archaeologists 2,000 years later. As you lie back on your imagined Persian bed, you begin to realize just how rich the textures were. Bedding could be stuffed with wool, cotton, feathers, even shredded date palm fronds in some regions. You sink into it like slow-drying honey. And always, always, the emphasis on scent. Persians were masters of olfactory ambiance. If you think today's lavender sprays are fancy, try sleeping in a bed whose linens were boiled in rosewater and hung to dry in rooms lined with sandalwood tiles. There's even evidence of aromatic pillows, small sachets sewn into the corners of headrests, filled with crushed saffron, cardamom pods, even tiny curls of frankincense bark. One recovered pillow casing from the ruins near Persepolis was embroidered with a stylized eye, the Zoroastrian symbol of vigilance in sleep. Did it protect the sleeper from bad dreams? Was it just aesthetic flair? No one's sure, but it suggests that pillows weren't just tools, they were spiritual companions. And here comes the quirkier bit: sleepwear, or the lack thereof. You might be wondering, did they really have pajamas? The answer is, sort of. What we call pajamas wouldn't evolve until much later, influenced by Indian and Arabic traditions. But ancient Persians had sleep garments, soft tunics, often undyed or dyed with calming hues like pale indigo or dusty rose, worn loosely over the body. Some even had sleeves that tied shut at the wrists, supposedly to keep demons from slipping into your hands at night. Again, historians still debate whether this was metaphor or magical thinking, but either way, it's the kind of bedtime lore that makes you glad your biggest worry is finding the cold side of the pillow. Then, there's the nighttime drink. Before bed, most people drank warm goat milk or diluted wine steeped with herbs like anise, mint, or chamomile. In colder areas, a mixture of honey and poppy seed extract was prized for its drowsy effect, though modern scholars would probably file that one under medicinal nap trap. Children were often given date syrup thinned with water, sweet enough to feel like a treat, light enough not to disrupt sleep. Adults? They sipped what one scroll poetically called the fog of the tongue, a kind of barley tea meant to dry the mouth and slow the mind. The link between what you consumed and how you dreamed was deeply ingrained. One old physician's text even included a recipe to summon gentle thoughts of cloud and bride, which probably tells you everything and nothing at once. Now here's a truly odd piece of history. Some nobles slept with dream mirrors. Stay with me here. These were handheld polished bronze mirrors, placed face down beside the bed. The idea was that your soul, which wandered during sleep, could glance at its own reflection and be reminded to return by morning. Historians have yet to agree if this was a widespread practice or a specific courtly superstition, but enough of these mirrors have turned up in burial chambers to suggest it was more than a bedtime novelty. You turn your head and imagine seeing one of these just beside your lamp. Flat, heavy, and slightly warm to the touch. Maybe it's engraved with your house emblem. Maybe with a line from a poem. Something like, "The dream is not less true than the waking." Not bad for a culture that considered sleep a kind of sacred theater. We haven't even gotten to the soundscape yet. In the homes of the well-off, musicians sometimes played soft string pieces as residents drifted off, usually on instruments like the tar or santur. But in humbler homes, the soundtrack was more elemental: wind through lattice windows, the plink of water from a wall fountain, maybe the low, rhythmic thud of neighbors beating rugs late into the evening. All of it, in its own way, lullaby-like. And speaking of lullabies, some of the earliest known Persian lullabies date back to Achaemenid times. They weren't saccharine. Many were melancholic, full of metaphors about stars weeping or lions guarding dream gates. But the cadence was always slow, soft, and layered with that mix of warning and comfort that only a truly ancient civilization can get away with. You're not quite ready to fall asleep yet. You want just one more story. One more scented whisper from a time when beds weren't just for sleep. They were sanctuaries, stages, and sometimes, very gently, sparring rings. So you snuggle deeper. The cushion beneath your head has begun to cradle the outline of your skull. Outside, a dog barks once, then is silent. Your ears ring with the imagined notes of a santur fading into stillness. And you wonder, what did they dream of in rooms like this? The pillow beneath your head is still soft, still holding the warmth of your imaginary scalp, and you can almost feel the way it yields with the weight of your thoughts. But tonight, those thoughts are not your own. They belong to someone a few thousand years older, someone lying back in a palace or a field tent, gripping their favorite cushion with theatrical flair, preparing for an entirely different kind of slumber. Because now, yes now, we arrive at the peculiar and surprisingly enthusiastic tradition of Persian pillow combat. No, not the playground kind where you sneak attack your sibling during a sleepover. We're talking about something halfway between a social ritual, a training exercise, and possibly the oldest sleep-themed competitive sport humanity ever devised. Welcome to the world of Balish Zadan, literally pillow striking. It wasn't a formalized sport like polo or wrestling, both of which the Persians also adored. But Balish Zadan, according to scattered sources, and gossipy travelogues, was an evening amusement that cropped up in noble homes, military camps, and particularly during festivals. Pillows were wielded not just for comfort, but as friendly weapons of soft chaos. Now, before you picture embroidered fluffs flying in slow motion across a palace courtyard, let's set the stage properly. It's dusk in an aristocratic manner somewhere near Ctesiphon. The day's heat has just begun to withdraw from the flagstones. You're reclining in an open-air hall, lit with flickering lanterns, your robe a little too warm, your stomach pleasantly full of saffron rice and melon slices. The wine has been watered down, the guests have gone quiet, and then someone stands, picks up a tasseled bolster, and says, "Who dares face me in battle?" That's how it often started. A joke, a dare, a challenge. And then cushions were flying. These were not your hotel pillows. Persian sleeping pillows were often firm cylinders, stuffed with tightly packed wool or cotton and covered in thick brocade. Some had decorative flanges, others were looped at the ends with ribbon. All of them were heavy enough to make an impact, but soft enough to leave your opponent mostly unbruised. Mostly. One traveler from the 10th century CE wrote of a man whose honor was questioned and defended with a pillow to the jaw before reconciliation was made over dates and rose sherbet. Whether that's an exaggeration or just a very polite duel, we may never know, but it paints the picture. Pillow fights weren't necessarily frivolous. They could settle scores, tease rivals, or simply give warriors something to do while waiting for their armor to be cleaned. Historians still argue whether pillow fighting had any military training value or if it was purely a domestic game. Some theorize that in younger boys' education, it served as an early introduction to timing, balance, and endurance, especially when your enemy was 3 cousins and an uncle who had a suspiciously good swing. In military camps, pillow bouts may have been a stand-in for weapons training when swords were being sharpened or tempers needed softening. Some even suggest soldiers used helmet bags or folded blankets in place of true pillows, turning boredom into a gentle form of brawling. One odd artifact even appears to be a training manual of sorts, etched illustrations of 2 men wielding cylindrical objects while kneeling in a tent. Could be a pillow. Could be a sausage. The academic jury is still out, but in noble homes, Balish Sedan often took on a performative, almost courtly quality. In harem quarters and royal salons, it was not unheard of for pillow duels to become part of evening entertainment. Picture young noblewomen, dressed in soft robes, challenging one another to duel for the best sleeping spot or the last sugared fig. These weren't aggressive fights, but stylized, more dance than duel. There's even a rumor of one concubine who won the Sultan's favor with a pillow feint so graceful it was immortalized in verse. Fringe detail alert: some pillows were scented specifically for these matches, filled not only with cotton but sprigs of dried basil or crushed rose petals. If you were going to get thumped in the shoulder, at least it smelled nice. There's also evidence of seasonal variations. Winter pillow fights involved warmer bolsters, sometimes heated near a brazier first. Summer versions took place outdoors, in courtyards or under pergolas, often with lighter cushions wrapped in linen. Now you may be wondering, was there a winner? Sort of. Pillow fights weren't scored like modern sports, but a clean hit to the chest or a toppled opponent would often earn applause. Sometimes the loser had to recite a verse of poetry or serve drinks to the crowd. In one account, a prince reportedly lost a match and was made to sing a lullaby from childhood while holding a bolster over his head like a shame hat. The point wasn't victory. The point was softness, literally. In a world where so much revolved around war, hierarchy, and decorum, pillow fighting was a subversive little pocket of play. It turned domestic objects into expressions of strength and silliness. It brought laughter to rooms that usually demanded stillness, and it reminded people, highborn or humble, that even warriors need to sleep eventually. By the way, this wasn't just for the living. Some burial sites in central Persia include pillows as grave goods, long, firm cushions embroidered with verses and symbols. Scholars still debate whether these were meant to comfort the dead, ward off spirits, or maybe just give them something soft for their eternal nap. One grave in particular included a tiny bolster with the inscription, "May your dreams outlast your worries." That's either incredibly sweet or low-key haunting. Probably both. As you drift in this imagined room, perhaps hearing the distant thud of another pillow fight echoing through time, you start to see the theme. Sleep wasn't passive. It was prepared for, fought for, played into. You didn't just fall asleep, you danced into it, you dueled for it, you earned it. Feather by feather. You roll slightly in your own invisible bedding now, the imagined weight of a Persian cushion balanced near your elbow, just in case. Your body's not tense, just prepared. For dreams, for play, for the long, soft stretch of night still ahead. The pillow settles again, still warm, still pressed faintly to your cheek. And now the room around you changes once more. The soft rustle of fabric, the flicker of oil lamps, the unmistakable hush of a night deep in the desert. This time, you find yourself in the outskirts of Persepolis, not in the golden heyday of kings and warriors, but later, quieter, when history was fading into myth and tradition clung like incense smoke. You are not in a palace tonight. You're in a merchant's home, snugly walled with clay and cedar beams, and it's winter. Your feet ache from the cold tiles. A mangal glows near your toes, coals breathing like sleeping cats. And near the hearth, rolled up like sleepy hedgehogs, are children, cousins, siblings, neighbors, all curled under striped woolen blankets. But they're not asleep, not yet, because this, right now, is the moment they've been waiting for, the storytelling hour. And tonight's tale, a legendary pillow fight between the wind spirits of Mount Damavand. According to the storyteller, your uncle, your aunt, maybe that one cousin who always exaggerates, there were once two ancient mountain spirits, Shab, the night, and Bod, the wind. They argued constantly over who deserved to control sleep. Their arguments were loud and dramatic, and, in typical mythological fashion, culminated in a pillow fight so epic, so thunderous, that it rumbled across valleys and knocked stars loose from the sky. In this version of Persian folklore, pillow fights weren't just human antics. They were cosmic metaphors, soft violence as celestial drama, feathers as falling stars, a sneeze from Bod could scatter dreams, a sigh from Shab could flatten a field of wheat. The children listening don't question this. They lean forward, eyes wide, as the story spirals into absurdity. Downy pillows the size of minarets, laughter that shakes the moon, the sun begging them to stop so it could rise in peace. Eventually, the spirits tire themselves out and collapse into the snow, clutching their cushions, and dream of nothing for 1,000 years. That, they are told, is why it snows on Damavand in summer. It's just leftover pillow stuffing. Silly? Yes. But essential. Storytelling was the glue of Persian night culture, and whether the tale featured gods, goats, or ghostly pillow-brawling spirits, it created a transitional space between waking and sleep, a twilight zone where logic thinned and dreams felt closer. You didn't fall asleep during the story. You fell asleep through it, as if it carried you into another layer of the night. Mainstream historians agree that storytelling was a nightly tradition in many ancient Persian households, even more common during winter months. It wasn't limited to children. Adults, especially after the evening meal, would gather for long-form fables, often involving historical kings or exaggerated versions of their own ancestors. One document from the 12th century mentions story carpets. Yes, literal carpets, woven with images from famous tales, laid out in front of the hearth as both decoration, and narrative prompt. Each square contained a scene, and the family storyteller would hop from image to image like a bedtime bard. And sometimes, the final scene was always a pillow fight. Fringe detail. A few texts hint at story pillows, embroidered cushions with stitched scenes or sayings designed to spark tales. One surviving example reads, "He who throws the pillow first tells the story last." That sounds like rules to a game, or maybe just some ancient Persian reverse psychology. Of course, not all stories were playful. Some were cautionary, others moralistic, some gently spooky. There's a whole subgenre of whisper fables told specifically before bed, where the protagonist is saved only by staying still, staying silent, or falling asleep. You can see what those stories were really trying to do. Historians still debate how much of these tales were scripted versus improvised. Some say storytellers followed strict oral traditions, repeating canonical versions. Others argue it was all made up nightly, embellished, localized, maybe even crowdsourced by whoever was still awake enough to shout suggestions from under their blankets. You're getting drowsy just listening, aren't you? That's exactly how it worked. The story was a lullaby in disguise, and just like that, you're back in the present moment of this long-lost evening. You watch the firelight flicker on faces slowly slackening into sleep. One child fights it, flopping dramatically onto a cousin with a muffled thump. Possibly the first pillow of the night is thrown. Another giggles, another burrows deeper. The storyteller's voice fades into a mumble, then silence. Someone snores. The pillow fight of the wind spirits has clearly claimed its audience. And you? You start to notice the rhythms, how every part of this bedtime ritual is a kind of soft choreography. The lighting dimming just so, the mangal's heat fading at the right pace, the voices lowering in volume. Even the way people shift their pillows, thump, fluff, roll, feels timed, almost musical. We don't think of ancient people having bedtime routines. But they did. They knew how to stage the descent into sleep. And in Persia, that descent was paved with stories and laughter and softness. As you listen to the last imaginary giggles and the not-so-imaginary ticking of your own slowing thoughts, you feel the weight of the story blanket settle across your shoulders. It's invisible, sure, but warm, woven from centuries of bedtime repetition. The mountain spirits are quiet now. No more feathers in the air, only breath, steady and slow. You're still nestled where you were, the pillow faintly cool now as your skin adjusts. But the world reshapes itself yet again. No longer the cozy hearth of a Persian home, but now a wide stone courtyard under a desert moon. Sand crunches softly beneath woven slippers. A new breeze whispers, dry, precise, as if it's traveled straight from a history scroll. You're in Ctesiphon, once the heart of the Sasanian Empire, now just a flickering dream stitched into the fabric of Mesopotamian night. The palace walls loom around you in the distance, but your eyes fix on a low bench where two boys sit cross-legged, each clutching a cylindrical object wrapped in linen. The Sasanian prototype of what can only be described as a combat cushion. They're not just playing. This is a demonstration. See, the Sasanian elite, ever fond of combat readiness, allegedly incorporated a form of mock battle training for boys using padded tools. Lightweight, often filled with millet husks or sheared wool. There are mentions of these in obscure court documents. Night skirmishes meant to build reflexes, bonding, and coordination. One weary royal tutor described the sound of padded thuds in the moonlight, followed by peals of laughter and sudden silence when a pillow connected squarely with a nose. These weren't chaotic brawls. They were lightly choreographed exercises, paired off 2 by 2, like duels. Blows were measured, and rules existed. No strikes to the ear, no stuffing ripped, and the victor had to offer a gracious apology post-match. Very dignified for a pillow fight. Mainstream historians sometimes roll their eyes at this, unsure how much was real training versus ritualized roughhousing. But the documentation, thin and fragmented, suggests that some form of nighttime training took place among noble families. And it may well have involved the closest analog to a proto-pillow fight. Fringe scholars have pointed to small bas-reliefs in children's quarters showing boys mid-swing with padded objects. One, now housed in Tehran, clearly shows a smiling youth with a poofy cylinder raised above his head, either a ceremonial scroll or a really determined bedtime wallop. The jury's still out. Tonight, the two boys spar lightly under the stars. Each move is exaggerated, almost theatrical, their linen pillow clubs whooshing through the air. Nearby, an older man, maybe a trainer, maybe a sleepy uncle, sips a ceramic cup of warm goat milk, unimpressed. This is less about skill and more about winding down. Energy spent, giggles released, the body too tired afterward to resist sleep. And let's be honest, you know this from experience. A good pillow fight is more exhausting than any lullaby. One boy flops backward in faux defeat, limbs sprawled, and his friend drops beside him, victorious and breathing like a steam kettle. The moon doesn't care who won. Neither does the owl watching from the rooftop. But down on the warm stones, the boys have become part of a much older rhythm. Because in many ancient Persian households, nighttime wasn't the end of activity. It was just the beginning of softer rituals. Daylight belonged to fathers and merchants, scribes and soldiers. But nighttime, that was the dominion of mothers, children, and slow rituals, of whispered secrets and feather-stuffed truce. You stretch your legs out just a bit, feeling that sleepy tension in your knees, as if you'd just been through a sparring match yourself. Not painful, just used, like a candle that burned a little brighter for a moment. The courtyard dims. A servant comes by, quietly, gathering the training pillows, checking for tears. Each one is inspected. No one wants stuffing spilling out in the middle of the night. A torn pillow is a noisy pillow, and noisy pillows mean sleepless children and cranky uncles. Historians still argue whether these nighttime bouts had any symbolic meaning, whether they were tied to lunar rituals, seasonal changes, or even subtle status displays within noble families. After all, not everyone had the luxury of linen-stuffed pillows just for play. Perhaps it was a subtle flex. Look at how peacefully our children train, even under the stars. You notice now that the boys are gone, swept into the dark by bedtime's invisible hand. The courtyard is empty except for the slow scrape of the servant's sandals. But the image remains. Two boys, once brimming with the last light of wakefulness, now likely tucked under woolen throws, dreams pressed close behind their eyelids like secret scrolls. No fanfare, no grand ending. Just a pillow dropped beside the bed, silent witness to the odd, endearing dance of sleep preparation in a forgotten empire. There's a whisper in your ear now, not real, but memory-shaped. You imagine a tutor's exhausted sigh. If only battlefields smelled like lavender and linen. That's the magic of bedtime rituals, isn't it? They shrink the grand and noisy into something soft and human. As your body slackens again, deeper into the cushions of now, your thoughts drift like those forgotten feathers. Each one a thought you won't need until morning. You're still floating there, lulled by the ghostly hush of moonlit stones. But the dream shifts again, slowly, gently, like a curtain pulled aside to reveal the next room of history. Now you're inside, somewhere cooler, the kind of place that smells of pressed herbs and beeswax, and where silence itself seems trained, like a loyal hound curled by the hearth. This is the home of a respected Persian healer, one of the few women in her village licensed, so to speak, by sheer reputation alone. The locals call her Darya Khanum, and they bring her bruises, burns, and lately, Something else entirely. Pillow injuries. Yes, you heard that right. Because while pillow fighting was mostly lighthearted fun, sometimes enthusiasm overrode etiquette. And so, when a child came home with a tender temple or a red cheek, they were sent to Daria. She kept a stash of cooled cloths soaked in rosewater, plus a special salve made of poppy seed oil and crushed mint. There was a specific technique too. Cool compress, clockwise circle, then a firm blessing so the pain leaves quicker. Modern historians, they scoff. Most claim there's zero clinical record of pillow-related ailments. But a fringe theory, popular among sleep culture enthusiasts, yes, those exist, suggests these micro-injuries were part of why Persian households treated bedtime with such care, to undo the chaos before rest. A post-fight restoration ritual, complete with aromatic balms and gentle scolding. Tonight, Daria dabs salve on a boy's brow while his older sister sits nearby, cradling the offending pillow like it might bite again. She offers an apology in whispers, followed by a bribe, half of her date cookie, and permission to pick tomorrow's bedtime story. All forgiven. Meanwhile, a kettle steams behind them, scenting the room with cardamom and fig bark. That's for Daria's own bedtime brew, an infusion she swears calms the soul and keeps the pillows light. You glance at her shelves, lined with jars of crushed herbs, folded scrolls, and, most interesting of all, a small collection of cloth-covered sticks. Practice pillows, she calls them. Slightly weighted for balance. If you think that sounds suspiciously like medieval pillow nunchucks, you're not alone. This is where things get even cozier. Because once everyone's bumps are tended and stories chosen, Daria closes her home to the public. It's time for her rest, and Persian tradition doesn't skimp on that. She unfolds a thick woolen mat, layers it with quilted fabric, and then performs her nighttime stretch. Arms overhead, slow twist, 3 yawns in a row. Her cat, naturally, imitates every motion with exaggerated disdain. It's here, in the quiet between candle snuff and sleep, that the real magic unfolds. The ancient Persian art of the pre-sleep recitation. Not a prayer exactly, not a poem either, but a kind of hybrid, a whispered chain of proverbs passed down from grandmothers, meant to guide dreams and hush the mind. You catch snatches. Soft head, soft heart. Feathers forget the fight. If your pillow sinks, the world floats. Utter nonsense, maybe, or the deepest truths you'll never fully understand while awake. This, dear listener, is one of the rare fragments of history that feels perfectly preserved. The way a certain light wraps a room, the way warmth pools in folded fabric, the way a body, finally still, allows memory to rise like steam. And let's be honest, you're probably starting to drift right now, aren't you? That delicious in-between state where every sound muffles, every limb loosens. Where you remember only the softest details, the flecks of mint in the salve, the hiss of the kettle, the cat blinking in perfect time with your own heavy eyes. Let's tuck one last thought into this chapter, like a final corner of the quilt. Historians still debate whether Persian bedtime customs were formalized, whether every home practiced them the same way, or if this was more of a village-to-village tradition. Some even argue it was class-based, with elaborate rituals confined to the wealthy. But then again, who has the richest rituals, if not the tired and the poor? You picture Daria now, fully reclined, one arm above her head, the other curled like a comma. Her breath slows. The room is nearly dark, save for the last glowing ember in a painted dish of ash. She mutters one final proverb, maybe to the cat, maybe to the air. Never trust a pillow with too much pride. You smirk because you almost understand what that means. Then the ember fades. The cat purrs, and so does time. You roll onward, deeper into the plush folds of this historical featherbed. And now you're not just in a room, you're under the stars. A courtyard, actually, mid-autumn. somewhere in the old city of Shiraz, under vines that curl like script and lanterns hung low on iron hooks. The courtyard is quiet now, but earlier tonight, it was a battlefield, not a war-torn one. Don't worry, a pillow battlefield. Children from neighboring homes gathered here after supper, each carrying their champion pillow. Some of them embroidered, others fraying at the edges like retired veterans of past skirmishes. Think tug-of-war rules, feather-to-feather combat, and just enough parental supervision to prevent total destruction of the grape arbor. But now, with cheeks flushed and energy spent, they've been bathed, wrapped in soft cotton gowns, and are laid out like little burritos across woven mats. The courtyard has become something else entirely, a dream staging ground. And you? You sit with the elders at the edges, sipping lukewarm tamarind water and listening to their tales. One of the uncles, his mustache more legend than hair, leans over to tell you about a time he claims to have bested 3 cousins with nothing but a bolster pillow and his signature crouch technique. The accuracy of the tale is questionable, but you smile because somehow this detail will stay with you longer than most headlines you've read this year. You notice something lovely. Before sleep, the family performs a pillow check ritual. Not fluffing exactly, more like pressing. A gentle test of firmness and scent. They believe, seriously, that you can't dream well if your pillow is either too proud, reed, overstuffed, or too humbled, flat as a coin. One woman even whispers to her cushion, "Don't get ideas." You watch her smile as she does it, not mockingly, but like she's honoring an old friend. A mainstream historical fact buried in the bedtime silence. Pillow filling. The Persians, especially during the 10th to 13th centuries, experimented with a mix of kapok fiber, goat hair, even threshed reeds. The elite got feathers, of course, but regional variations abounded. Some scholars say the fillings shifted seasonally, lighter stuffing in summer, heavier in winter. A few fringe theorists argue that regional pillow signatures were so distinctive you could tell where a guest had traveled from just by the shape of the cushion they brought with them. Imagine TSA agents sniffing for stuffing types today. This gets us thinking. Maybe these rituals weren't just about sleep. Maybe they were social. A code. If your neighbor showed up with a bolster wrapped in blue muslin and a cedar scent, it told a story. Maybe they were grieving. Maybe they were wealthy. Maybe their dreams needed guarding. Pillows in this world weren't just fabric. They were passports. And you start to realize something kind of wonderful. Pillow fights were, at their soft heart, rehearsals for bedtime diplomacy. How to strike without malice, how to defend without resentment, how to yield gracefully, then share a date cake. That courtyard begins to fade a little now, and the lanterns blur. But wait, you're not quite done here. One small boy is still awake, tracing his finger along the embroidered edge of his pillow. His aunt, nearby, sings a lullaby that folds the day into melody. The song references a feathered moon and a fox with downy paws. You don't understand every word, but the cadence alone unspools your nerves. Historians still argue whether these lullabies were specific to pillow culture or just convenient pairings. One 18th century traveler from Venice noted that Persian songs at bedtime were as rich and confusing as their gardens, which could be either praise or confusion. No one's sure. But it doesn't matter, really, because by the time the boy finally closes his eyes, the pillow beneath his head isn't just a prop. It's a nest, a map, a quiet instrument that's played its part in dozens of family epics. He'll dream of foxes tonight, and feathers that glow, and maybe, if he's lucky, a rematch tomorrow. And you? You're still sitting there, invisible and floating, your cup of tamarind sherbet long since cooled. You're starting to feel the gravity of sleep, of story, of softness. It's pulling at your jaw, loosening your thoughts, dimming the contours of the courtyard tiles. So, we'll let the lanterns gutter out. Let the night deepen. Let the pillows finish their song. And if you're still awake enough to think about it, just for a second, remember this. Even the gentlest traditions were crafted with intention, with texture, with weight. A culture that treats rest as a ritual is one that doesn't just care about the body, it understands the dream. Let's go find yours next. The dream pulls you gently forward now, through the scent of old cedar chests and lamp oil, to a quieter place, indoors this time. You find yourself in a narrow upstairs room of a caravanserai, somewhere along the dusty Silk Road between Kashan and Herat. The walls are thick, the window small, and the door made of sun-darkened walnut, bolted from the inside with a piece of red string. The fire's gone out, but there's enough heat left in the stones to keep the room cozy. On a thin mattress stitched with a sun motif, a merchant in his late 40s settles himself with practiced care. His head rests on something oddly ornate. Not a pillow exactly, but a padded leather headroll filled with what sounds like rice husks. You tilt your head. Rice husks? Apparently, yes. You'll learn that headrests in this region, during certain periods, were built to align the spine and reduce snoring, which, judging from the man's deeply grateful wife snoring across the room, was clearly a regional concern. This moment, though still and dim, is rich with texture. The man runs his fingers along the hem of his own travel pillowcase. It's embroidered with symbols, some decorative, some practical. A small stitched lion on one corner for courage, a delicate evil eye motif to ward off jealous traders, and in one corner you spot what looks like a merchant's tally mark, stitched in gold thread. That's not for flair, it's for claiming the pillow in crowded quarters. Fringe detail alert. In some roadside inns, pillow theft was reportedly so common that wealthier travelers took to marking theirs like livestock. A famous anecdote in a 13th century Persian diary describes a scholar waking up on the road to find his pillow replaced with a sack of onions. "I wept," he wrote, "not for the theft, but for the poor choice in compensation." But even theft aside, these portable pillows served a larger purpose. They were private things in a public world. On long trade journeys, you couldn't always control your bed, your room, your companions. But you could control the small softness that cradled your head. It was comfort, familiarity, memory, and, oh, the memory. Press your cheek to it now and you'll get a ghostly whiff of last week's fig grove, last month's wool market, the faint trace of rosewater from a letter tucked inside. For this man, the pillow is an archive of places seen, deals struck, friends lost to time. When he sleeps, he dreams of ledgers and lanterns, and the sound of camels sighing under moonlight. Historians still argue whether such pillows were ever formally traded themselves, whether a finely scented headrest was valuable enough to barter. Some believe they were given as tokens of hospitality. Others claim they were strictly personal and rarely left the owner's side. One text even suggests they were used to smuggle perfume oils and spices in tight border crossings. Though, let's be honest, fragrant contraband sounds more poetic than practical. As the room darkens, you hear the faint scratch of a quill. Someone 2 rooms down is writing by lamplight. Maybe it's a record, maybe it's a love letter. But here, in this shared shelter of worn stone and layered wool, even strangers become neighbors. You take a moment to notice your surroundings. A clay basin with traces of henna paste. A single sandalwood comb left on the sill. A pair of mismatched slippers, one striped, one plain, set neatly near the bed. These are quiet things, but they hum with life. Their owners are asleep, or nearly. Their thoughts loosening, like coins scattered on a rug. The merchant finally exhales, long and low, his hand still resting gently on that pillow. A parting gesture, a silent goodnight to the day. You follow his breath and feel your own slow down, matching, mirroring, softening. It's curious, isn't it? How a bit of cloth and stuffing, sometimes rice, sometimes goat hair, sometimes a secret bundle of dried orange peel, can hold so much, not just a head, but a hope, a habit, a whole emotional muscle memory of how to rest. And there's something democratic about it. Pillows didn't care about titles. Whether you were a court scribe or a spice carrier, your pillow was yours, a place for your dreams alone. Maybe that's why, even in dusty ledgers and faded scrolls, you still find references to gift pillows and grief pillows. They were tools, yes, but also gestures. So, picture this. You, weary traveler, finally stretching your limbs under a star-stitched woolen coverlet, the embers from a central hearth glowing faint in the corner. Your head finds the right shape, the perfect angle. The pillow molds to you like it remembers something. Maybe a kindness, maybe the way you laughed yesterday, or the poem you whispered when no one was looking. You close your eyes, the road finally behind you. And just before sleep arrives, you hear the faintest thing, the merchant muttering something under his breath. Not a prayer, a price list. Old habits, you think, and smile. The scene drifts again, soft, like silk sliding off a low table, and you find yourself in the courtyard of a modest Persian home. Night has fully wrapped the city now, and only the stars and the gentle flicker of an oil lamp near the doorway light your way. There, nestled between two date palms and an old grapevine, a group of children plays with hushed laughter. You wouldn't think it at first, but you're about to witness the purest form of an ancient ritual, the household pillow fight. No spectators, no grand arena, just cousins and siblings in slightly oversized linen tunics, ducking and swinging with arms full of loosely stuffed cotton bolsters. The pillows themselves aren't what you might expect. These are longer, thinner, and clearly handmade, stitched in haste by some tired aunt or clever uncle using leftover fabric from old robes. One striped, one spotted, and another bears a faint stitched phrase along the seam, something like, "No figs after dark." Whether that's advice or nonsense, who knows? There's something beautifully chaotic about it all. A girl with tangled curls lets out a triumphant squeal as she dodges a flying cushion. A younger boy, determined to fight like the grown-ups, brandishes his pillow like a ceremonial mace, and a wiry teenager, clearly the oldest, tries to keep order, but ultimately gets clobbered by a sneak attack from behind. Classic big sibling downfall. Historians still debate whether such household pillow fights were spontaneous or had specific festival ties. Some records suggest they were part of no ruse festivities, a chance to shake out the spirits of the old year. Others believe it was simply an expression of warmth and play in colder months, an indoor release when the streets turned to mud. But the laughter here isn't ceremonial. It's real, unfiltered, the kind of laugh that turns your legs weak and makes your pillow strike a little sloppier with every swing. Let's pause on the setting for a moment. Above, the sky is deep indigo, sprinkled with constellations named in languages long fallen silent. You hear a pot clink in the kitchen, someone setting aside the lentils for morning. There's a smell of saffron still lingering in the fabric of the children's sleeves. The ground beneath them is smooth stone, worn from generations of little feet. It's all intimate, familiar. Now, here's your quirky historical tidbit. In some Persian medical texts, pillow fighting was actually encouraged, as long as it didn't interfere with digestion. One 11th century physician claimed that playful flailing of the limbs may counter melancholia if it be done with soft implements and warm company. So yes, technically, you could write a prescription for a pillow fight. Modern insurance would never cover it, but it's nice to dream. You notice one of the younger children slowly fading out of the game, pillow held limply in one hand. She makes her way toward the sleeping platform near the wall, curls up against a cushion, and lets the night tuck her in. The others follow in their own time, trailing off like a song at its final verse. And you? You're still watching, heart full of quiet warmth. There's a kind of softness in this night that doesn't come from fabric. It comes from belonging, from being allowed to collapse into comfort after motion, from knowing your name is spoken here, even if only in whispers and yawns. In the background, the older sibling begins collecting the scattered pillows, stacking them neatly in a corner like a librarian restoring books after a late reading binge. You see him pause, pick up a pillow, and press it to his face for a moment. A breath, a memory, maybe. Or maybe he's just enjoying the smell of laundry dried in open air. You wonder if he'll remember this night, if he'll grow up, leave the house, wear crisp scholar's robes or heavy merchant cloaks, and one day, just before sleep, remember that time he got ambushed by a 7-year-old wielding a floral print pillow with lethal precision. The courtyard quiets. One final giggle, one clumsy snore. You can't help but smile. The pillows, once wild weapons of sibling war, now form a peaceful border around the sleepers. A quilt of sorts, soft edges containing the slow descent into dreams. You shift slightly in your own position. Yes, you're lying down now too, and realize your cheeks against something familiar, something yielding and warm. A pillow, of course, yours. And suddenly, you feel very much like one of those children, safe, settled, and somehow lighter. There's something about watching others fall asleep that invites your own slumber. Like yawns, it's contagious. And here, under the open sky and beside a night-soaked grapevine, the air is thick with that pull. You breathe in, the scent of cumin and coals. You breathe out, the sound of sandals shuffled away, of old stories folded up like linen. And just before sleep fully claims the courtyard, the youngest murmurs something in her sleep. It might be a prayer, it might be a recipe, or maybe just one last reminder not to eat figs after dark. The night deepens, and you drift farther into a softer part of the story. The pillow fighting's echo has faded, and now you find yourself inside a quiet workshop at the edge of a Persian town. The floor is earthen, smoothed by generations of footsteps. A low oil lamp burns in the corner, throwing amber arcs of light across a simple wooden table. Here sits a man, mid-30s, bearded, barefoot, wrapped in a woolen vest over a long linen tunic dyed with crushed madder root. He hums softly while threading a bone needle through pale cotton cloth. His hands are calloused, steady. He's making a pillow, not for fighting, not for sleeping, but for selling. See, not every pillow was born into combat. Some were simply commodities, part of a centuries-old textile trade that linked Persia with cities as far as Cairo, Venice, and Samarkand. This man's village specializes in lightweight pillows stuffed with fine goat hair, ideal for temperate climates. Their cases are patterned using hand-carved stamps dipped in indigo dye, crescent moons, clusters of pomegranates, or stylized fish believed to bring prosperity. He dips his needle into beeswax, knots the thread with a twist, and keeps sewing. Outside, a donkey brays in the distance, and somewhere a nightjar calls. The rhythms of rural life, gentle and repetitive. And inside this humble room, you sense a kind of care, a quiet pride in the way this man presses each seam flat before continuing. It's not about beauty or status, just durability. That pillow must survive dozens of nights and countless dreams, maybe even the occasional wrestling match between children. Now, here's your mainstream fact for the night. Persia was a central hub in the Silk Road network, and its textile exports were prized across the ancient world for their quality and variety. From quilted mattress rolls to embroidered bolster covers, Persian artisans left their stitchwork scattered across empires. But the fringe detail? Some pillows were believed to carry charms. Stitching a tiny bead or dried herb, like rue or lavender, into the corner of a case was thought to guard against nightmares or unwelcome spirits. Pillow as talisman, thread as protection. And here's where the scholars start to grumble. Historians still argue whether such charms were truly widespread or more of a regional superstition. The archaeological evidence is patchy. Too few preserved pillows. Too many assumptions made from folktales. But the stories persist. Back in the workshop, our craftsman pauses to blow on his fingers. His tea's long gone cold, and he's blinking more now. He leans over, stretches his back, and inspects the half-finished pillow. It's good. He knows it's good. He folds it gently, places it in a wicker basket with others, then pulls a thin shawl around his shoulders and settles onto a floor cushion. He'll finish the rest in the morning. For now, even the maker needs sleep. You follow his gaze to the tiny wall niche where he's placed a lamp, a chipped ceramic cup, and a small pouch, probably where he keeps the herbs for the scented fill. There's a scrap of cloth tacked to the wall above it with a saying in calligraphy. He who stitches gently rests deeply. You can't help but feel that this man, in his quiet room, might be closer to peace than most. No scrolls to read, no grand strategy to plot, just fabric, thread, and the long trust that a night's work will cradle someone else's dreams. As he dozes, a cat emerges from beneath a bench and curls near the warmth of the lamp. Its tail flicks once, then stills. Outside, wind brushes the shutters. A few sheep murmur in their sleep. And you, yes, you, have drifted close again. Not quite inside the room, but hovering near the warmth of that little flame. Maybe you're curled in your own bed now, blanket pulled up, one arm folded beneath your pillow. Maybe your head feels just a little heavier than it did 10 minutes ago. It's a good weight, like stories settling into your bones. The pillow maker's breath slows, the oil lamp gutters. The last thread trails from the needle like a silver crescent. And you, still listening, start to wonder if the pillow beneath your own head holds any ancient stories inside it. A wish tucked in the seam? A bit of someone else's laughter caught in the fibers. Or maybe, just maybe, the act of lying down, closing your eyes, and letting the world go is enough magic all by itself. The dream is gentler now. The world you're drifting through has softened at the edges, like parchment that's been thumbed over too many times. You're still in ancient Persia, but the scene has shifted. Now you're inside the courtyard of a larger home, the kind that once belonged to a respected merchant. There's a shallow fountain murmuring in the center, its ripples throwing moonlight in dappled patterns onto the white stone walls. To your left, beneath a colonnade shaded by fig vines, a group of children are being tucked into bed. Yes, bedtime still exists here, even in a house this grand. There's laughter, a bit of last-minute squabbling over who gets which cushion, and finally, the sigh of surrender as they're wrapped into a small nest of sleeping mats and embroidered pillows. These aren't ordinary pillows, mind you. They're large, triangular bolsters, sharply stuffed with camel wool, their covers dyed in deep cinnabar red and midnight blue. One has a stylized lion stitched along its edge. Another bears the words, "Let the moon keep your secrets," in faded Persian script. You crouch near the edge of the sleeping area, watching a grandmotherly figure lean down and smooth a little boy's hair. Her voice is low and steady, speaking in a rhythm so practiced it barely needs thought. It's a story, of course. Something about a traveler who tricked a demon using only a comb and a goose feather. The kind of tale that's old enough, no one remembers where it began, only that it always ends with a quiet smile. Here's tonight's historical nugget. In many wealthier Persian homes, it was common to have entire rooms dedicated to rest and lounging, known as takhnashin rooms. These spaces were filled with layered carpets, large floor cushions, and, you guessed it, lavish pillows that doubled as both decor and utility. But the quirkier tidbit? Some Persian pillowcases were designed with tiny interior pockets, often unnoticed unless you knew to look, where you could stash small items like coins, a prayer bead, or a perfumed note from someone you maybe weren't supposed to be corresponding with. You know, for reasons. And yes, there's scholarly side-eye on this one too. Historians still argue whether these pockets were common across regions or merely a fashionable trend limited to a few urban centers during certain dynastic periods. There's a lot of hemming and hawing in dusty academic journals about textile compartmentalization as a status marker, which is a fancy way of saying rich people liked secret pillow pockets. Back in the courtyard, the older woman rises slowly, joints cracking audibly. She pinches out the last of the candle flames, one by one, using a curved iron snuffer shaped like a leaf. The air is perfumed with orange blossom and faint smoke. The children are still now, their limbs tangled in sleep, the cushions pulled close like shields against the night. One child still clutches a feather, possibly from the story, possibly just a lucky find. Either way, his fingers don't let go. You wander into the far corner of the courtyard, where a servant is quietly fluffing a stack of unused pillows. It's a task done without urgency, almost like a meditation. Each pillow is smoothed, tapped, and rotated before being stacked again with the seams lined up just so. There's pride in this too, an invisible standard maintained night after night, even though no one may see it. This is the unseen art of comfort, of hospitality, of small routines that become the bones of a culture. Pillows in this house aren't just for sleeping. They're for status, for warmth, for posture, and poise. They separate you from the cold ground and remind you, softly, nightly, that someone cared enough to make you comfortable, and you, in your bed, might feel the ghost of that same ritual brushing against your own pillow now. A subtle shift, a tiny kindness. The wind rustles through the vines. One of the children murmurs in their sleep, and a fig leaf drifts lazily onto the floor. You're not tired so much as folded now, creased into the fabric of this night, pressed gently into its seams. Even your thoughts have slowed, their edges smoothed like the corners of a well-used cushion. The old woman exits through a wooden door with an iron ring handle. It creaks, then clicks softly shut, and the courtyard sighs into stillness. The hush of the Persian courtyard lingers, and now, as if your dream self has gently rolled over in sleep, the scene shifts again. You're deeper into the countryside, where night stretches wider and quieter than in the city. The air is cooler here, tinged with the scent of hay and goat musk, and somewhere in the distance, an owl makes a call that's almost too rhythmic to be natural. You listen closer. It's not an owl at all. It's someone humming. You follow the tune, floating toward a small adobe dwelling nestled at the edge of a dry riverbed. There's a single clay lantern flickering in the window. Inside, a family of 4 is winding down from their day. The father leans back against a thick, straw-stuffed cushion, his robe loosened, one hand lazily turning the pages of a worn manuscript. The mother is plucking lint from the seams of her daughter's tunic, a nightly ritual that clearly doubles as a check-in chat. The son, maybe 10 years old, is fiddling with 2 makeshift pillows, one square and lumpy, the other thinner but longer. He arranges them on the woven mat in a very deliberate fashion, then flops down dramatically, arms outstretched, like he's just collapsed after surviving a siege. You stifle a chuckle. Even in ancient Persia, kids were theatrical. Tonight's historical anchor, pillow stuffing. We tend to think of feathers when we think old-world comfort, but in rural Persian households, stuffing was far more creative. Goat hair, dried rushes, bits of linen scraps, and even thistledown were used, depending on what was on hand. Pillows were luxuries, yes, but they were also deeply practical, repurposed, repaired, restuffed, and recovered as seasons changed. The quirky bit: some early medical treatises from the region advise sleeping with a pillow not just under your head, but under your knees or even your ankles, depending on your body's humoral imbalance. One particularly dramatic suggestion recommends wrapping the knees in a warm pillow stuffed with roasted barley to repel melancholic winds, which, honestly, might be a better treatment than doom-scrolling Twitter at midnight. There's debate, of course. Historians still argue whether these home remedies were widespread practices or simply recorded by overly enthusiastic court physicians who had read a few too many translated Greek scrolls. Some say the barley thing was metaphorical. Others point to records of barley shortages in certain provinces and suggest, no, people were absolutely toasting their grains for the sake of better knee vibes. Back inside the home, the mother rises and walks over to a small chest. She lifts the lid and retrieves a folded square of fabric. A pillowcase, you realize, but this one's different. The embroidery is finer, the stitches tighter, and there's a shimmer of silver thread along one edge. It's not flashy, just reverent. She smooths it with both hands, then hands it to her son, who immediately recognizes it and presses it to his cheek. You see, it's the special pillow, the one brought out only on cold nights or when someone's had a hard day. No one says anything about it. They don't need to. It's a kind of household code, a softness passed silently from hand to hand. The fire pit crackles softly. A pan of river stones, heated earlier, has been wrapped in cloth and placed under one of the mats to keep the floor warm. The lantern flickers once, then steadies, and still that humming continues. You finally spot its source, the father. He's not singing with words, just letting sound roll up from his chest, low and repetitive, something between a lullaby and a breath exercise. It's hypnotic, grounding. He may not even know he's doing it. Outside the window, stars begin to gather like witnesses. You lean into the night with the family, your breath slowing to match theirs. There's something so powerfully human about this scene. No high drama, no ornate gold leaf palaces. Just people, worn and warm, easing their bodies toward rest. The boy curls around his special pillow like a cat, one hand beneath it, one leg hooked over. The girl has already shifted twice in her sleep, mumbling about a lost sandal and something involving apricots. The mother rubs her knees, her expression saying she knows tomorrow will arrive too quickly. But for now, the silence is enough. Even your own limbs feel heavier now, as though your body has borrowed the sleepiness of the room. It's as if you too have earned rest through repetition, the small daily choreography of comfort. There's no final event, no fade to black. The family simply closes their eyes, one by one, as the night deepens. And that barley pillow? Still warm beneath the mat. Somewhere in the corridors of your imagination, a wooden door creaks open. It doesn't slam or groan, just that soft, weathered sigh of age and habit. You step through, and the air is instantly different. Warmer, drier, tinged with perfume, and wait, is that mint? You're in a hammam. Not the bustling midday version full of chatter and steam, but the nightfall iteration, quieter, emptied and lit only by a scattering of oil lamps floating in glass bowls. A few servants move about in soft slippers, collecting damp towels and folding linens. The water basins are still warm from earlier use, and the polished marble floors reflect flame like ripples across a still pond. And then, tucked into a side chamber, you spot something unusual. Two older men, clearly friends, are seated on low stools beside a pile of, yes, pillows. Not just one or two, but an actual pyramid of them, each hand-stitched, some of them striped, some with faded floral patterns, all clearly well-loved. What on earth are they doing with all those? They're reminiscing. Each pillow represents a different hammam memory, a festival, a missed wedding, a birth celebrated with a special bath. They're even lightly tapping each other with the pillows as they talk, nudging forward a story, correcting a detail, punctuating a shared laugh. You lean closer, barely breathing. This is the oral archive, Persian style. Here's the mainstream historical fact for this scene. Hammams in Persia weren't just places for bathing. They were social arenas, civic halls, informal courts, and, at times, theaters for storytelling. Some communities even scheduled pillow fights within the hammam as a kind of team-building ritual. The fights weren't chaotic or random. They were often tied to religious festivals or social milestones. Think of it as a less aggressive, towel-less game of capture the flag, but with embroidery. And now, the quirky bit. One document from the city of Nishapur mentions a hammam that hosted an annual Feast of Pillows, where older men would reenact famous local stories using nothing but cushions and dramatic grunts. The audience, usually teenagers and younger apprentices, was expected to cheer or hiss at the right moments, depending on the tale. And while it's hard to prove these pillow performances were widespread, at least two other cities, Qazvin and Ray, had similar records. Historians still argue whether this Feast of Pillows was an actual tradition or a literary invention inserted by nostalgic poets trying to romanticize aging. Some suggest it was a satirical ritual mocking political meetings. Others believe it may have evolved from earlier Zoroastrian ceremonies in which soft objects were thrown at demons to banish bad spirits with good comfort. Honestly, if you've ever banished a bad mood with a plush pillow and a decent nap, that theory kind of holds up. Back in the hammam, the men have moved on from memory to slow competition. One lays a pillow on the floor and dares the other to balance a second one atop his head while reciting lines from a poem. The loser? He has to massage the other's shoulders for 1 minute. No one's keeping score. That's not the point. One servant brings in a copper tray of warm drinks, steamed milk with rose water, and a dusting of cinnamon. The men sip and sigh in that satisfied way only elders can master, like they've lived entire volumes and chosen their favorite paragraphs to recite aloud. The heat from the marble floor has crept up through your soles, and now into your calves, then your knees, until even your earlobes feel warm and relaxed. The hush here is different than a bedroom hush. It's a heavier quiet, like history weighing down every towel rack and water jug. The oil lamps flicker. The men stop talking. And then, in a move you did not see coming, one of them flops backward onto the pillow pile like a triumphant tortoise. The other nods solemnly and follows. Side by side, on a hill of soft things, they rest. No blankets, no scripts. Just the satisfaction of a day and a lifetime well softened. The servant returns once more, this time not to serve but to simply retrieve one of the men's slippers. He tucks them gently beside the man's head like a crown. You smile. Even a slipper can be a soft throne when the world is quiet enough. And somewhere outside the hammam, a wind rises. Not cold, not sharp, just present. Brushing through cypress trees, caressing the domes, tugging gently at the past. You let yourself lean into that sound, the hush of wind meeting stone, and think, if every pillow in this room carries a memory, how many soft memories does the world hold? You might never count them all, but tonight, you felt a few. You wake, well, not really wake, but stir, in a room that feels just slightly different from the hammam. The air is still warm, but drier now, scented not with steam and rosewater, but cedar, dust, and ink. You hear the faint scratch of a reed pen on parchment, the swish of cloth as someone shifts on a cushion. A lantern flickers behind a carved lattice screen. You're in the study chambers of an old madrasa. But not just any madrasa. This one is run by a curious master who believes history should be felt, not memorized. You wouldn't be surprised if he introduced algebra with hand puppets. Right now, though, he's supervising a class in kinesthetic cultural retention, which you slowly realize is a very scholarly name for a glorified pillow fight. Yes, again with the pillows. It's a theme. The students, about 7 boys aged maybe 10 to 15, are standing in a rough circle. Each holds a soft, square cushion embroidered with geometric stars or Cufic script. Their robes are tucked in for freedom of movement, and their slippers are strewn haphazardly across the edge of the room. The teacher, a wiry man with an elaborate turban and a suspicious grin, holds up a scroll. "The conquest of Herat," he announces. "Tell me the date or suffer the cushion." One boy fumbles. A whoosh. He gets gently pelted by 2 pillows from his classmates, each blow followed by peals of laughter. The boy grins sheepishly and mutters something about trying again next time. Here's your historical fact. Educational institutions in the Islamic Golden Age, particularly in Persia, often emphasized memorization through recitation, movement, and competition. Though not pillow-based, the techniques could be quite physical. Students paced while repeating Quranic verses, clapped rhythms to remember poetic meter, and sometimes reenacted military or trade events to solidify timelines. And the fringe tidbit? A 14th century pedagogical scroll from Shiraz makes passing reference to memory games played upon mats with soft rebukes for error. One footnote mentions cushions used in jest, though historians still debate whether this refers to literal pillows or metaphorical cushions of critique. Gentle corrections as opposed to harsh punishments. Honestly, with how much this culture adored textiles, either is believable. What we do know, soft, safe error correction was prized. Public humiliation, not so much. In some madrasa traditions, especially those influenced by Sufi teaching, spiritual and scholarly error were approached as opportunities for growth, not shame. Pillows make a pretty fitting symbol for that mindset. Supportive, adaptable, and not likely to leave bruises. One boy in the back now takes his turn. Herat was taken in 1507, he says firmly. The teacher raises an eyebrow. Debatable, he says. According to which chronicler? Cue nervous glances. Someone shuffles forward with a pillow raised in slow-motion dramatic flair. The boy squeaks. The Timurid court annals. The teacher claps. Deflected. Correct citation. There's a soft thump as the pillow is dropped in surrender, and the circle rearranges for the next question. You glance toward the walls. The room is lined with shelves of manuscript scrolls, most handwritten, many faded at the edges like ancient parchment marshmallows. Some bear faint illustrations, stylized battle scenes or trade caravans, inked in ochre and lapis. Above the shelves, a tapestry flutters in the draft from a half-open window. It depicts a lion being gently bopped on the nose by a dove, wielding, what else? A pillow. The students are laughing again. This time someone shouted, "Wrong dynasty!" and was instantly besieged by 3 cushions in mid-air flight. One of them knocks off his cap, which he retrieves with mock solemnity, bowing as if before a sultan. Historians still argue, the teacher is saying now, about the precise number of battle elephants used in the siege of Samarkand. But do you know what's never debated? A pause. The boys lean in. He picks up a cushion, places it on his own head like a crown, and says, "The importance of soft learning." The class groans at the pun. You smile. Outside, dusk has folded fully into night. You can just make out the stars beginning to shimmer above the madrasa dome, and the distant call of a nighthawk echoes against the city walls. Somewhere in the alley, a street vendor closes his cart, and you catch the tail end of a lullaby wafting from a nearby home. The lesson ends. The students carefully return their pillows to a woven chest lined with linen. One boy lingers, running his fingers over the embroidery on his cushion, tracing it like a memory he wants to hold a little longer. The teacher extinguishes the lanterns one by one. The room sighs into darkness. You step backward, gently, and close the door. Just behind it, waiting for you like a loyal cat, is another cushion. You sit, and in that moment, it becomes clear. In ancient Persia, education didn't have to be painful. It could be padded, poetic, even playful. Soft things didn't mean soft minds. They meant resilience wrapped in empathy. And maybe, just maybe, that's something our own schools could learn from. You lean your head back. The silence is deep now, like ink spilled across a carpet. And you're drifting again. You blink, or think you blink, but your eyes are already closed. You're somewhere else again, though the air feels familiar, like wool warmed by breath, like bedtime. A narrow room surrounds you now, lit by a single oil lamp in the corner that glows just enough to show thick carpets underfoot and an arched ceiling of painted plaster above. It's a bedroom, not yours, not anyone's in particular, but somehow it feels like it belongs to the whole empire. Someone is humming softly in the next room. Not a melody you know, but the kind that has no beginning and no end, just the shape of comfort in sound. The walls here are lined with quilts, hung not just for decoration, but for insulation. Stitched panels of deep crimson, indigo, and faded gold. You recognize a repeating motif on one, a lion curled beside a moon. In the center of the room is a bed. It's wide, low, and made of carved walnut, polished by generations of hands and sleep. The mattress sags just slightly in the middle, proof of long usage, of stories whispered into the sheets. On it lies a pair of winter pajamas, carefully folded, soft flannel in faint stripes with stitched cuffs and a small drawstring pouch nestled beside them, likely full of dried rose petals or cloves. Here's your final historical fact. Ottoman winter sleepwear was functional, yes, but also deeply regional. In Anatolia, quilted robes called yorgans were common. In the Balkans, heavy linen tunics lined with wool. Along the Black Sea coast, fishermen's families often wore sleep vests made of felted goat hair, itchy but nearly windproof. Some garments were patched for decades, stitched and restitched, softened by years of washing in lavender water or lye soap. But the fringe detail tonight is this. There are records of pajamas being passed down in dowries, not as heirlooms of wealth, but of comfort. A grandmother might gift her flannel robe, carefully laundered and perfumed, to a new bride or a departing grandson. And in at least one estate inventory from 1781 Istanbul, a bundle of nightshirts stitched with verses of affection is listed between copper spoons and sugar loaves. Verses of affection. And still, historians argue over the intention. Were these verses just decorative? Or charms? Blessings sewn into the seams to ward off bad dreams and summon peaceful sleep. Perhaps both. After all, the line between the practical and the poetic has always been a little blurry in Persian and Ottoman culture. You ease yourself onto the edge of the bed. The mattress gives with a quiet sigh. You look down at the pajamas and notice something unexpected. Stitched into the cuff, barely visible in the lamplight, is a phrase, curved like a smile. Even the moon sleeps. You exhale. The humming has stopped now. Silence folds into the room like a second blanket. But this silence doesn't feel empty. It feels full of memories, of fabrics worn thin by warmth, of the soft weight of history when it's not marching or conquering, just resting. The wind tugs gently at the shutters. And then, in that final moment before sleep pulls you fully under, you realize something quietly astonishing. Through 2 hours of ancient pillow duels, poetic stitching, and forgotten fire rituals, you've been wrapped in something that feels like safety. Not just physical comfort, but a cultural one. A reminder that even empires pause, and when they do so with softness, story, and care. The lamp gutters low. The cushion beside your cheek still smells faintly of cardamom. And now, at last, the wind down begins. The room around you softens, edges blurring like ink in warm water. Breath slows, muscles melt downward. Imagine the whisper of quilted fabric brushing your shoulders, the quiet rustle of someone adjusting their slippers across a wooden floor, the faintest creak as a window shifts in its frame. All of it wraps around you like story thread. Tender, weightless, true. Outside, the night deepens. Stars blink slowly overhead, ancient as the lullabies stitched into every seam of this tale. The wind no longer nudges the shutters. It only listens now, resting with you. No more questions, no more arguments from historians about goats or pajama cuffs. Only this, the hush that arrives when everything is known and nothing needs proving. So let go. Let the folds of this forgotten world settle over your thoughts like a well-worn quilt. Let history's most human moments, those of bedtime, of softness, of shared warmth, guide you toward rest. Because sleep isn't a break from the story. It's where the story finishes its sentence, then curls up beside you, content. Sleep well.